2024, an election year like no other. From the candidates to the issues, from voter integrity and analysis, we'll discuss debates, trends, patterns, election laws, and more. This is Vote 2024, Path to the Polls.
6 swing states could swing the pendulum in the presidential direction. Right now, Florida is not among them. But with the abortion issue looming large on the ballot here in November, it could sway voters' opinions and swing Joe Biden's fortunes, especially since the polls show a very tight race. That's why Florida plays a more crucial role than many may believe. Like 2020, this contest will go down to the wire, and the candidates will be counting and courting every voter. Why? Well, fact is, roughly 6% of voters in the swing states will be the deciders, if you will, in the 2024 presidential election. It's a major focus on Path to the Polls this week. Also, who are those most likely to support the men who want to occupy the White House, even though fact is, most voters don't like their choices this go round. A look at who is supporting each of the candidates. Welcome to Path to the Polls. I'm Bruce Hamilton, and joining me on Path, political analyst Daniel Cronrath. Good morning. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for Bruce. Always a pleasure.
So 6 swing states. Among them, they've been identified as critical for either candidate to win the 2024 presidential election: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. They were determined to be toss-up states, along with their 77 electoral votes. That's according to the Cook Political Report. Both campaigns are obsessed with these 6 states, especially by Donald Trump, because they were disputed in 2020. So what do you make of this?
Well, let's start with the beginning, where the relative to recent polling, which has been conducted, where President Trump is doing better in these swing states, and it's going to be in the South. He's performing better in Georgia, which we know historically in the past, Georgia has been a conservative state, except for the election now of Senators Warnock and Senator Ossoff, because of some of the unique factors what happened in 2020 in that Georgia senatorial runoff. You'll remember they had a runoff for the election, which tipped the balance of the Senate, where President Trump actually told Republican voters to stay home and not go out because the results of his election were skewed, more than probably really helping the Democrats regain control of Senate with that decision. But again, you look at Arizona, you look at Nevada, the states where President Trump is doing right now. The states where Biden is doing better are those Rust Belt states that he won back. Recall, in 2016, if 77,000 voters in the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania had voted for Clinton, not Trump, Hillary Clinton would have been the president of the United States. Biden, with at least that Scranton Joe, that blue-collar image he tries to project, was able to win back those 3 critical states. So what I would suggest is when we look at this election moving forward, if Biden finds himself in a position where he looks like he's going to lose either one of those 3 states that he regained from President Trump, well, then he's in a position where he's got to win something which looks less likely, trying to repeat the magic of Georgia, for example, or trying to repeat his success that he had in Arizona. But I think everything for the Biden candidacy right now starts with maintaining those 3, those older Rust Belt states, which are, tend to be more UAW, tend to be more auto worker, more union oriented. If Biden can't hold on to any of those, he's going to be in a lot of trouble when it comes to the fall.
And in Michigan, with a large Arab population, that's going to be key.
Well, that's exactly right. And we can't predict right now where the conflict is going to be in Gaza and where the conflict is going to be in the Middle East. We know right now, and I know this is something you wanted to talk about this morning in terms of the demographic of the vote, that young voters who are typically, even though they may not come out to as great a percentage as people who are older Americans, they are critical to the Democratic coalition. And if you just see what's going on in college campuses with the mostly peaceful, but sometimes we get, agitators coming in and whipping this up, from my perspective, and I was not alive then, but this has every look to me of 1968, 1969, with people coming out and starting to rally around the Vietnam War. What's interesting today, however, is because of technological advances, this generation isn't watching traditional news. They're getting everything through TikTok. They're getting information directly from reporters on YouTube and other kinds of programming. So I think a lot of the times when we see the disconnect right now, Bruce, beyond the fact of the history of Israel and the Middle East and how it was founded coming off the genocide, the Holocaust, I feel what's happening is that young voters are getting information from different sources than older Americans. And that's also making it hard for older Americans to understand why younger voters are taking this path. For example, former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton had some very, very uncomplimentary things to say about young voters this week, saying that they don't understand their history and that they're making a mistake. Well, for them, all they know is what they're seeing being beamed directly from the Gaza Strip into their phone, and they're looking at it and finding it reprehensible.
But they don't have certain perspective. And
They don't have the
That's a whole other story.
Right.
The black vote is also unpredictable right now. Historically, it's Democratic, but if you talk to a lot of young black voters, they feel disenfranchised right now.
Yeah, they do, especially young African American men. This is going to be the first election where the last, and I know that you've had Michael Bender on who does excellent work over at UNF. This is a presidential election right now where we're projecting the African American male vote for Donald Trump could be as high as 33%. Again, not to sound cynical, but if you're the Democratic coalition, if you're the Democratic Party and you're trying to get Biden over the finish line, suggesting that a historical coalition that you usually expected a 94, 95% turnout, that a third of that coalition, at least on the male side, would be thinking about voting for Donald Trump. Again, that's just one of those things that they have to be concerned about relative to trying to recapture that vote.
And that's because they don't think that Scranton Joe really is communicating his vision for the economy effectively in their minds.
Right. And I'm not talking about the president. I think this is one of the real challenges they're going to have in the fall is going to be the president's ability to articulate this. You and I have talked about this, and of course many other television programs have talked about this, that our president is 81 years old. So while, for example, a lot of people think he performed very well at his last State of the Union, is he going to be able to consistently repeat that kind of messaging? Because we need to be honest, President Biden does not do a lot of press conferences. They are very, very selective to the interviews that they give him, making sure that they're kind interviews. Will he be able to continue to articulate a positive message? And I know this is the last time that I joined you on the poll. One of the things we also talked about was what Americans, Trump and Biden voters alike, feel is a disconnect from President Biden when his people and his individuals out there representing his administration are bragging about the strength of the economy. But people sitting around their kitchen table are now paying X amount of dollars for eggs or X amount of dollars for fuel, because where inflation has really hit people at the hardest are in those sectors that they cannot escape, Bruce. We're not talking about billionaires buying yachts. We're talking about home heating bills. We're talking about gasoline. We're talking about food. And we're talking about rent. So hopefully, if you're a Democrat, President Biden, as he gets closer, will begin to sharpen his language and go after that kind of voter and try to find a way and communicate better where he actually has helped them in this economy.
I know a lot of people took him to task when he communicated that he would not give Israel weapons when it came to the whole issue in Rafah and certain assault weapons. And, the White House just made it clear, I think it was yesterday, that that was not a senior moment. He meant what he said, and he meant to say it.
Right. And I think what you're going to have to see Biden is really, we've alluded to, is walk this tightrope. Yeah. Walk this tightrope. Let's really dig in specifically to Florida, too. We know that if you're going to envision Florida as being any kind of a swing state at all, that two of his most powerful allies in this state are going to be the Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Down in South Florida.
Yeah, that's correct. And the head of the Florida Democratic Party, Nikki Fried.
And I want to get more to that in just a second, specifically Nikki Fried, because she said something, and that'll come up later here on Path. Okay. Let me get more to the whole swing state issue.
Sure.
A seventh swing state is included in some political polls, North Carolina. It voted for the Republican presidential candidate in just about every election over the past several decades. But some pundits and the Biden camp think otherwise. Razor-thin margins, the reason why in the coastal states recent contests? I mean, it has been razor thin if you look at the past couple of contests.
Sure. And let's not forget that, he was a transformational political figure, but Barack Obama won North Carolina in 2008, okay? Barack Obama was able to win Florida twice, even though that Florida was a completely Republican state. But I think, and this is why I'm a little bit skeptical of those polls, I think that relative going into this election, where there's going to be a lot of negativity, there's going to be a lot of mudslinging, there's going to be a lot of apathy, there's going to be a lot of people who don't feel that their vote has efficacy, so they may stay at home. To really get, I believe, Georgia and North Carolina and some of these other marginal states consistently in play with the Democrat, I think you have to have a rock star Democrat. And I don't know if that's something that President Biden can project any longer in those states. But to your point, we have many months to the election, and the polls are still statistically within the margin of error, many of them. So can the Biden, candidacy, can they find a way to flip North Carolina? If they could, Bruce, then it gives Biden the ability to maybe lose one of those rust bucket states that I said at the beginning of the broadcast. Right. That's where his coalition begins. But if you're able to pick up a North Carolina, well, then maybe you can drop a Pennsylvania, because right now, Biden was able to win Pennsylvania from Donald Trump. Right now, he's losing Pennsylvania pretty badly if you've looked at the polls. So maybe there's an opportunity there to exchange that. And by the way, North Carolina will be a good prize. It's a growing state. I forget the exact number of electors right now it has because of just last reapportionment. But it would be a tasty little snack for the Biden campaign to be able to pick up that.
It's still, there's what, 7 months to go.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, and anything can happen. Gosh knows. So a Washington Post report found that the winner in 2020 would have changed by flipping just over 81,000 votes in Arizona, Nevada, Washington, and Georgia. A Republican insider's calculations are similar, saying that persuadable voters are below 10% in every battleground state. So maybe 6% in Wisconsin, 8% in Michigan, lower in Arizona. You think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I do, but I also think that those numbers, I think they're actually a little bit large. And I just say this intuitively from past elections. It's very, very difficult for me, given the stark choice and where we're at in the United States right now, that there's still 10% of an electorate going in there who are undecided. I think they may respond to a pollster and tell them that they're undecided. But I think, and here's another Florida caveat too, as this goes down the path to election. And as we put together our polling models, we got 4 million MPAs in Florida now. How will they end up? How will they end up performing in a general election? Because anyone who's a registered no party affiliation voter, they just had to sit out the primary cycle. So who does that benefit? I would say that most political scientists would say that's going to benefit the Republican candidate, but we're not really sure about that. How many MPA voters, and I know this isn't something you wanted to reach out to today necessarily, are going to be voting for Robert F. Kennedy, who may be very.
We will talk about
that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Who may be very, very appealing to if you were disenfranchised by Trump, or if you liked Trump initially, and now you've got a guy with the last name Kennedy. I think circling back to this too, I think that for a lot of African American voters, the temptation to vote for another round of Kennedy, when you look at what JFK did for African American voters, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., his brother, who was a civil rights leader who was assassinated during the 1960s, for a small percentage of black voters, I think that Kennedy may be very powerful. Then you're suggesting that even more takes away votes from Biden.
And I'm going to ask you later if you think that RFK Jr. has the potential to play the spoiler, but the fact of the matter is, the Kennedy family has been very vocal in saying that they don't like Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that if you are a Republican or a Democrat out there, I think the other thing that several decades of polling have shown out, Bruce, is that while somebody may say at the beginning, I'm going to be voting for Gary Johnson, the former Libertarian candidate, and he's polling at 7 or 8%, what did his final result turn out to be? 1.5, 2. People who will say maybe they're voting for Jill Stein in the Green Party, and maybe she even hits 5 or 6% in a poll, and then at the end of the day, she receives 1.5%. I think most voters who indicate that they're undecided really do end up coming back to their tribe. Most of them, and of course by tribe I mean either the Republican or the Democratic Party.
And historically, no third-party candidate has really done anything in any election to.
Well, I would.
Well, you're going to say Ross Perot?
Yeah, I was gonna, George H.W. Bush, God rest his soul, would probably disagree with you on that point, but he might be the only one. To your point, really, Ross Perot, the impact that he made in a lot of those states, taking votes away that were disproportionately exit polling revealed were going to be going to George H.W. Bush. Did he win any states? No, but I mean, let's not forget he got 18% of the popular vote, Ross Perot, in 1992. Really setting up a very interesting feature of American history. Bill Clinton being twice elected in the United States without a majority of the vote. Less than 50% of the American public voted for Bill Clinton twice, because Ross Perot ran in 1996 as well.
Yeah, but it's really the economy that cost Daddy Bush the election.
Yeah, it could have been.
Else, but,
you will probably recall that after the success of the first Gulf War, he was polling at something like 89% of the American public. I mean, that's like every Republican.
And then it tumbled.
And then because of the economy and the economic shocks that occurred after that, right?
Right. I mean, James Carville was like.
Well, and let's not forget, read my lips.
Read my lips.
No new taxes.
Right.
I mean, that's him writing an ad for the Clinton campaign.
Words he later ate.
That's exactly it.
So it's interesting to note how their respective parties view the run-up to an election. An article in Axios portrayed party sentiment this way: Democrats are more worried about November than Republicans are. Democrats say the race is winnable. Republicans say they're winning. The swing state map, they believe, is a reason why. So let's narrow things even further. If you work on averages, it appears that about 6% of voters are in play in these swing states. What's going to swing their votes? The economy? Immigration? Abortion?
I would say all three, perhaps, and it depends upon what coalition you're in. I think the one which is going to have the broadest based appeal is going to be the economy, okay? I think nationally, now obviously Florida is going to be a little bit different because this is going to be an election cycle where we have two very, very well discussed that they're going to be spending millions of dollars on ballot amendments, which may be actually bringing upward pressure from the bottom of the ticket to the top to drive out turnout. And of course, as you've said before, that's abortion rights, again, needing 60%, and the legalization of recreational marijuana. How much of a factor would they actually come into play? I think the pushback is that you're also going to see people who supported President Trump's appointment of 3 Supreme Court justices, who supported the overturning of Roe v. Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood for the Dobbs decision, which took place in Jackson. There's going to be a hardcore, adamant pro-life, and if you look at public polling, the extreme pro-life position versus the extreme abortion position, are kind of at each fringe, and then as you move, forward, there's a balance in the middle regarding a lot of nuance with where people think that pregnancy actually begins and all of those different things. I think you're probably going to see the extremes balance each other out in the state of Florida. But again, this is going to be tough to predict. How much money will they spend? What will that advertising campaign? What will you be able to do to get young voters out, okay, in order to vote for these issues? Hard to determine at this time.
So let me go where you wanted to a bit earlier. Talk about the abortion issue. Florida's not a swing state, but the abortion issue is going to play prominently in this election in November in the ballot, because there's something that could be on the ballot, an effort to overturn the 6-week ban. This was once a battleground state, Florida. For Joe Biden, now a cautionary tale because of that? Florida?
It's a fantastic question, and it's for me. I think that the 2 issues which are going to dominate in Florida, or at least dominate our media landscape, if we don't get any kind of resolve in the Middle East, I think that the perception that the Jewish vote in South Florida is so necessary to winning that a lot of that it's going to be. How does Joe Biden take care of individuals, and not to take you off topic again, but how does he work with party officials like Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Nikki Fried, who are outspoken Zionists, who support full funding and full backing by the United States for Israel? How does he juxtapose losing that coalition of older voters, okay, who are also going to be the ones to more likely turn out, versus a younger generation of voters who have unrest, who the Democratic Party also desperately needs to vote, but they're seeing the image from Palestine, and they're having a different reaction to a lot of the Israeli support or American support for Israelis in the United States, which, by the way, we also have to expand that, too, to another important demographic that we didn't get to, but probably largely because of me, was the vote of the white evangelical. Okay, right now in the United States, we have something, a rough estimate, we have 5 million American Jews, okay, who are watching the conflict in Israel, Gaza. We have 50 million Americans who identify as white evangelical Zionists, okay, who believe that they have complete support in Israel. How does that factor into Florida?
And you look at a scale. Think of this: 50 million white evangelicals, 5 million Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm creating a.
Yeah, well, well, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So, but I think what we need to say, and if I were to advise President Biden for whatever this is worth, I would tell him to give up on trying to get the white evangelical vote. I think that is so in lock with
it's not going to happen.
It's so in lock with President Trump right now. I think that if he wants to keep a key state like Michigan, another state which is not really in play but often mentioned is Minnesota, another area of the country has a lot of Arab American immigrants to it in the United States. I don't see at this point, given that the pro-Israeli vote will probably be voting for President Trump anyway, I don't see there to be a lot of political cost with President Biden just quote-unquote going for it and really trying to take on the Netanyahu government and say that the only reason you're going to be getting continued U.S. aid is if we come back to the negotiating table and we try to make this work with a 2-state solution. Because really, relative to that aspect, I don't know what Biden has to lose.
Yeah. Now, there are a lot of people say that going after Donald Trump and his policies isn't going to work for Biden, but it's doubtful he's going to carry Florida. But he's been denouncing policies here in the Sunshine State. Does he hope that the state serves as a warning to voters elsewhere what could happen if he doesn't win, and not just on abortion, but on looser gun laws, removal of books from libraries, and things like that?
Yeah, it could, and it's really interesting. I don't know, a lot of those policies that we attribute to Governor DeSantis and his lead up to running for president with the White House were obviously designed to appeal to a national primary audience for really, really conservative voters, where the governor wanted to market himself and basically create signs like you saw campaign literature like "Let's make the U.S. Florida," and a lot of these things that were developed. I don't know what kind of legs they're going to have for President Trump in the fall, but the one thing I can tell you is that most of the people who even supported, now we can talk about the animosity between the campaigns, obviously, and campaign operatives who are involved with that, but most DeSantis supporters are very comfortable sliding back and supporting President Trump again. I mean, if you just talk to them anecdotally, at a coffee shop or wherever you happen to be, they would say, yeah, we like Trump, but we also like DeSantis, and maybe he's a little bit younger and he's done a good job as governor. But it's not like those DeSantis voters are now suddenly going to be voting for Joe Biden. I mean, they're going to come home immediately to the Republican Party. What energizes the electorate again? I think you're right. I think it is going to be the economy. I think that these down ballot amendments could apply a lot of pressure to the top of the ticket, and then of course the big event, which they both sides claim they want to do, is what would a national debate look like? I almost think that would look cringeworthy, but we'll have to see, and we'll have to see if either side actually agree to it.
Even a Trump-Biden debate would be cringeworthy.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if Nikki Fried, who's the Democratic Party chair here, put it. Biden understands that if we're going to fight back against the extremism of the MAGA Republicans, that you got to come to the belly of the beast. Is what she's saying is that Florida's a showcase for the Republican national agenda and its impact on real people?
I think yes, and I also think it's Nikki Fried's opportunity if Florida could somehow be flipped to reinvent her own electoral career. She got beaten very, very badly by former Governor Christ when she ran in the Democratic primary, despite there being a ground wall of support for her. I think that in order for herself to target future races at a top level, could it be a run at governor again? Could it be a run for the United States Senate in the future? I think that saying, come to Florida, let's pull off the electoral miracle, you would see Nikki Fried catapult to the top of Florida politics in the Democratic Party. Not that she's already there yet, but let's just remember that like 2/3 of Florida Democrats chose a former Republican governor over her when she ran for governor last time. So I think this is really an opportunity for her to reinvent herself.
So it's self-serving, as was Ron DeSantis going to say, I'm going to support Donald Trump because I have ambitions for 2020.
Yeah, self-serving. Let me also.
It's the world of politics.
Right, but let me also couch this by saying that, I mean, if she could somehow, through her leadership, get that done, she would deservedly be a rock star. Because she would get all the accolades that she would deserve for making that happen, considering where we're at in the polling right now and the ease and comfort with which Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden before. I mean, if something changes this fall and she can attribute to herself, I mean, I think every Democrat in the state of Florida would be like, she is our person now. Look what she did.
She'd be lifting a 10,000-pound weight by herself.
Yeah, and let's also remember about Fried. She was, the first, statewide Democrat who was elected when she was Secretary of Agriculture in a very, very long time that she held that office, which again...
Quite an accomplishment in the state.
Quite an accomplishment in the state. Yeah, right. And that was the first election for Ron DeSantis. The Republicans won everything else. I'm trying to remember what her campaign slogan was. Something like weed, water, and weapons is what she ran on last time. Because that's literally what the Department of Agriculture mostly deals with, is water usage, legalizing marijuana, and then concealed weapon licenses at the time, which actually came out of the Department of Agriculture. So she had a nifty little campaign slogan. She was able to get out there. She has a lot of energy. If you've ever seen her on the pitch, she really does know how to work a room really well. If Nikki Fried could pull it out, if Nikki Fried could get it close, I think you could see her political career rebound.
All right. When we come back on Path to the Polls, a look at where the candidates find most of their support and a third-party candidate in the mix. RFK Jr., will he play the role of the spoiler? Path to the Polls continues after this short break. In trying to define those who support the candidates, it's probably easier to define Trump supporters than Biden supporters. If you look at the metrics, most Biden supporters seem to be willing to vote for him simply because they're more motivated to keep Trump from returning to the Oval Office than anything else. A Reuters Ipsos poll bears that out. 50% of Biden supporters in the polls described their vote as being against Donald Trump and his policies, compared to 38% who said they would be voting to support Joe Biden and his policies. 12% of Biden supporters were unsure which reason better explained their pick. Among Trump's supporters, 40% said they would be voting against Biden. 42% said they would vote for Trump to support the Republican and his policies. The rest, or 18%, were unsure which reason applied. If nothing else, doesn't that show you that Biden needs to make a better case for his reelection, especially in fiercely competitive states like Georgia and North Carolina? Best place for Biden to start and pick up more support, clearly articulating his economic vision like you mentioned before?
Yeah, I think so. I think, first of all, if you look at that polling data, it's kind of a hard spot to begin from when you're basically saying that the core of your support is going to be coming from people who are out there voting simply because they don't like your opponent, okay? So it leads to the question is how much of that anti-Trump sentiment is going to exist in these places that where Biden is going to need to win. I think one of the reasons I feel again, doubtful about Georgia and about North Carolina is simply because I think that Georgia is such an outlier based upon that last election. Now, do I think the one place I do think that where Biden can improve is I think in some of those western states, such as Nevada and Arizona. I think that, and if you look specifically, if you want to drill into these states and define what's going on, for Arizona, just to boil this down quickly, Carrie Lake is going to be on the ballot again in Arizona. If you'll remember the last time she ran for office, she has some very, very outspoken views. Was a former journalist in the state, is very, very, very well known. But she's one of the most polarizing figures if you look at national politics right now within her own state. So will individuals be coming out and say in Arizona just to reject her as they did before? Because she's, a lot of her issues, she's to the right of Donald Trump, okay, in a state which is traditionally very, very purple. Okay, so it's going to be interesting to see again how that will influence the election versus the two guys at the top. I think the other thing that Biden has to do, and I know this is going to be repetitive, he needs to swing that number down from people who are just voting for him to vote against Trump to people who really are voting for Biden because they want to be voting for Joe Biden. He needs to outline that message, and I'm sure that they're going to be focusing on this as we get to November. This isn't, well, we have to stop Trump. And to some way, Bruce, he can use the traditional national media outlets like MSNBC and CNN and let them cover the many Trump trials as harshly as they can and try to expose the president for what he is, while Biden should be pounding out a message which is positive, which is direct, should be reminding the Americans, whether they're feeling it or not, that our employment figures are very, very low historically, that we did come out of a shutdown economy with COVID, and we did it better than many countries around the world actually did because we pumped so much liquidity in the economy to keep people afloat. The Infrastructure Act, okay, Inflation Reduction Act is also as well. He's got accomplishments, but how can he soundbite them and how can he communicate them in a better way? And he's going up against a guy who, again, we say is probably one of the best natural politicians I've ever seen in Donald Trump. Nobody holds him to account for anything that he says or lies about. They just continue to, lend their support. It's kind of interesting when people suggest that they like Trump and they like Trump's policies. Trump's all over the place on his policies. Like he goes back, he waffles and wanes, consistently. So I do think that there's still a surrounding Donald Trump. It can't be dismissed. There is still a cult of personality around this man who still the Republican Party is infatuated with. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see what Biden can do to cut into that. What I would tell Joe Biden is I would simply not campaign to Trump America. I would campaign to the rest of America. Get that 6 to 10% vote you said that existed in swing states out. You can let the news media carry the water on that in terms of what Trump isn't in terms of the coverage. But Joe Biden needs to be talking about what Joe Biden is. And that's what I would. And despite,
whatever his accomplishments have been, his presidency is defined by his own unpopularity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's been a problem. All right, so let's get to this.
And by the way, before we move on from this too, there are things that local Democrats can do in this regard, okay? We've covered here the largest federal grant that we've received to the city of Jacksonville in our history to open up the Emerald Trail. That is correct, to finally create this project, which is basically we're going to cut the finishing time in half. There is no reason why Nikki Fried, there is no reason why Donna Deegan cannot be out reminding people locally that this was a product of the Joe Biden supported act, and that we're going to be taking this money, we're going to be investing investing in our communities, especially our underserved communities, in a way that we have not done in Jacksonville in a long time. And Donna Deegan will have a role here locally, reminding Democrats of that very fact.
And make Florida relevant again in this November 2024 election. And make no doubt about it, we're not taking a political stand here.
No,
we're talking about what Democrats need to do if they want to get the message out. All right, so let's get to this, something we alluded to earlier on Past to the Polls. Many Americans are fed up with both Biden and Trump, right? The new Reuters Ipsos poll showed significant support for independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and anti-vaccine activists, a scion of a storied political family, a family that, by the way, doesn't embrace him. In a hypothetical three-way contest, 30% of poll respondents chose Biden, 32%, Donald Trump, 20%, selected Kennedy. The rest said they were unsure or wouldn't vote. What do you think about the Kennedy factor?
Well, the first thing I would say, again, we alluded to this a little bit earlier in the program. I would take whatever polling figure you see for RFK Jr. and I would cut it in half, because I think at the end of the day, a lot of those people who expressed interest in him are going to come back to a candidate who they perceive can win.
And we've seen in the past,
right,
the polls are unreliable at best, especially at this stage of the game.
Well, and especially with third parties. I mean, they always tend to overvalue the third party candidate until they get in here, until they get into the race. I think that one of the things which is interesting about RFK Jr. too is that, you know, he began his career and has an accomplished career, for like many younger voters may not realize this. He was an environmental activist who did a lot of great things to protect this planet, if you're somebody who cares about the planet. This RFK Jr. that we have sitting in front of us today was a very, very different creature who started his career before he became, you know, a kind of a hero of the anti-vax community, obviously during COVID and a lot of those other things. But in some ways, RFK, you know, again, try to find any daylight between RFK and Donald Trump on Israel. He's been very, very pro-Israeli, which appeals, I think, to a lot of that voting set. He's flirted with I think he's attending the Libertarian National Party Convention to try to directly appeal to libertarians who may not feel as if they fit in either of the two parties. Of course, we know ideologically libertarians tend to be the right of the center-right Republican Party in the United States. At the end of the day, what kind of impact will he have? What kind of impact will a Jill Stein have? What kind of impact will a Dr. Colonel West have when whatever the communities that he's in? I tend, and I know this is controversial, especially with a lot of Democratic voters, most of the Green Party members who I talk to, and many surveys have pointed this out at the end, that if a Green Party candidate can't find a Green Party candidate, they're not voting for the Democrat. There's this perception somehow that they steal votes away from the Democrat. And I think that that may be more of a Democratic wish list, Bruce, than what it actually is a fact. Also, let's remember, a lot of Democrats go back to the election of 2000. Here in Florida, one in which they believe that Al Gore had the election stolen from him from George Bush. They blamed consumer activist Ralph Nader for the last 24 years for being on that ballot. Well, the Libertarian candidate took votes away from, Harry Brown took votes away from George Bush, too. And in some cases where National Democrats actually like to blame people for voting for the Green Party, the Libertarian Party actually took more votes away from the Republican Party. So, but at the end of the day, you're really talking about small margins. But why are these margins so important? You already pointed it out, Bruce. When you're only talking about tens of thousands of votes, or, you know, what was the margin in Georgia? 12,000?
12,000 votes.
Yeah, 12,000 votes. I mean, obviously, you can see if you're a part of the two-party machine apparatus, why you would be sensitive to any kind of third party or any kind of Green Party getting in there and monkeying up, you know, screwing that up. You know, so they need those coalitions to be firm.
What do you think his father would think of him? That's a tough question.
It is. I think he. You know, I'll give you my answer because this is, you know, opinion show. I think he'd love him at his son and be disappointed with him in his politics.
As a politician.
Yeah, I think that, again, when I look back at the body of RFK Jr.'s life, I remember a time that he was actually doing positive things, and when it was embraced by the mainstream of the Democratic Party. It's only later in life, for whatever reason, that he became what a lot of liberals would characterize as unhinged, you know, kind of a darling. If you look at where he's done most of his media appearances is on right-wing television, Fox and Newsmax. So. Yeah, it's always a tough question to speculate, but...
All right. We'll see where this goes. Always a pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Bruce.
Appreciate you watching. If you want to revisit the show, an encore presentation on News4JAX Plus tonight at 7. Watch at your leisure on demand anytime on News4JAX Plus, the News4JAX YouTube channel, news4jax.com. Have a great day.
See why every day more people are choosing News4JAX, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.